Hi. We've talked about production possibilities curves, and we have seen the trade off between being able to produce one good or service and another good or service, meaning that when we use our resources to create one item, we are losing the ability to create another item. So the more of one thing we produce, the fewer of something else we can produce. And this leads us into a discussion about comparative advantage in trade. So what we're talking about here is if we pretend that a country can only make two items, like we did with the production possibilities curve, and we think about two separate countries, and we say, okay, well, we've got two countries, they can both produce the same two items. Which one should specialize in one area and produce this item and trade it to receive the other item from somewhere else? All right. So what we want to know is who should make each item and then trade to be able to get the other item. In other words, who is best at creating something? Right. So we trade because we can end up with a better standard of living. Other countries have more resources than we do, other technology than we do. I shouldn't say more than we specifically. Different countries have different amounts of technology, resources, land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. So when we trade with other countries, we end up with a better standard of living. When we divide up the labor and each person or each nation specializes in what they do the best, it ends up being more productive for everybody in the world. For instance, the easiest way that I think about specialization is the way we operate in school. So when you were a small child, you went to the same teacher every single day, all day long. And now that you're in high school, you switch classes. And so I always say, well, if you came to me and you came to me first block and you stayed with me all through class until fourth block, what would end up happening? Well, you'd learn a lot of social studies, you'd learn a decent amount of English, some math, and you would learn zero science because I'm terrible at science. I could probably teach science, maybe, but it would be very difficult for me to do so. So in high school, you go to different teachers and you learn different things from them. So I could probably teach science, but I wouldn't be very good at it. And I would have to do a lot of studying, and it would not be worthwhile to you, the student, or me, the teacher, for me to spend so much time studying for a subject that I'm not very good at doing. And so you should go to a person who specializes in science and then come to me for economics, so that we end up being the most productive that we could be. So if you as the student are our output, right? If you're the product that we're trying to turn out of this school, the best way for us to teach you is for us to divide up the labor and each specialize in the subject that we know the best in order to teach you. We also talk about when you trade, whether it is nations trading or companies trading or individuals trading. Both groups will gain as long as the trade is both voluntary and non-fraudulent. So you may say, I'd like to trade my rolls for some baked Cheetos in the lunchroom. Well, that's all fine and dandy. Both of you, if two people decide to do that, both of you will gain from that trade. But if somebody comes and steals a roll off of your tray, then that is not voluntary, and so you don't gain from that exchange. If you decide you're going to trade your roll for a bag of chips, and you get the bag of chips and it turns out they're empty, you've been finessed. And so that becomes a fraudulent exchange, and therefore you don't gain from it. So gains are only going to benefit both parties as long as it is voluntary and non-fraudulent. So there are two words that we use when we're talking about this. We're talking about trade, and those are absolute and comparative advantage. All right, so we have keywords here, and if you notice, they are highlighted. That absolute advantage just means that a country may make more of a product than another country. Comparative advantage means that a country can make a product at a lower opportunity cost than another country can. So only with comparative advantage are we really going to pay attention to whether countries should trade with each other and who should specialize in what? Absolute advantage just simply means that one country has more resources than another. I will give you an example of this in just a minute, but there's an example on the next slide that I'd like to do first. So absolute advantage, your keyword is more. It just means one country can produce more than another because they have more resources. Comparative advantage means a country can make a product at a lower opportunity cost than another country. So let's look at the example on the next slide. And it's an example between the United States and Korea. We're going to assume they can use their resources to either produce vaccines or televisions. So if you're looking at the very first question here, and it's asking you which country has an absolute, I pushed too hard and the dictionary comes up, which country has an absolute advantage in vaccines? Well, you're looking at vaccines here. Which country can make more vaccines? Well, the US can make 6 and Korea can only make 1. So the United States has the absolute advantage in vaccines. When we want to know which country has the absolute advantage in making televisions, we see here the US can make 3, Korea can make 2. So the US makes more. So the United States has the absolute advantage in making TV sets as well. That doesn't tell us a whole lot of information except for that the United States has more land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship than Korea does. We just know US has more resources so they can produce more stuff. Okay, so what we want to know, if we're trying to figure out which of these countries should make vaccines and which countries should make televisions, we've got to sit down and figure out what the comparative advantage is. So that's going to require a small bit of math. So I'm going to show you how to do the math. And we'll do it. I'll show you 2 different ways. There's one way for you verbal people out there, those of you who like to use your words a lot. And there's another way for you people who are a little more mathematically inclined. It's not difficult math. It's just a concept that gets a little confusing sometimes. So let me erase my marks here. Okay, so if we're going to compare things, what we want to know is if the United States makes 1 vaccine, how many TVs are they going to give up to make that 1 vaccine? Or rather, for every vaccine they make, what is their opportunity cost in terms of television sets, right? So the way that we do this is we have to find out on a 1-to-1 ratio, compare the US, comparative advantage, compare the US and Korea on a 1-to-1 basis. So we're going to divide this side by 6 in order to make vaccines equal 1. All right. So if we divide that side by 6, what we do to one side, we also have to do to the other side. We'll divide this side by 6, and we end up with 0.5. That's hard to see that little decimal right there, but there you go. So for the Korea, for every 1 vaccine that they create, they're losing the opportunity to create a half a television. Korea is already on a 1-to-1 basis. So for Korea, their 1 vaccine costs them the opportunity to make 2 televisions. So we would write that like this. I've got my little whiteboard here. Hopefully you can see it. So we would say the US's opportunity cost of 1 vaccine is 0.5 TVs, and Korea's opportunity cost of 1 vaccine is 2 TVs. All right, so there we go. I'll make sure I can get it in the camera. All right, so what we see here is who has the lower opportunity cost of producing 1 vial of vaccine? Well, the United States' opportunity cost is a half of a television. Korea's opportunity cost is 2 televisions. So it costs the United States less to make 1 vaccine. So since the US has a lower opportunity cost in vaccines, they should make the vaccines, right? We can do this the opposite way to compare in television. So if we erase our marks here and we want to compare televisions, we've got to make each side of televisions equal 1. So if the US makes, that is ugly, right there. If the US makes 1 television, then they are losing the opportunity to make 2 vaccines. So for every 1 television set that the US makes, they lose the opportunity to create 2 vaccines. For Korea, on the other hand, for every 1 television set that they make, they're losing. I'm struggling writing here. Let's erase that and make that look better. All right, for every, let's divide that by 2 as well, because whatever we did to this side of the equation, we have to do to this side of the equation. They're missing out on 0.5 vaccines. So if the US makes 1 TV, they lose out on 2 vaccines. If Korea makes 1 TV, they lose out on half a vaccine. So we would write it like this. The US's opportunity cost of 1 TV is 2 vaccines, and Korea's opportunity cost of 1 TV is a half of a vaccine. So if we're looking there, we see that Korea has a lower opportunity cost in creating, get that light off of there. Korea has a lower opportunity cost in terms of creating television. So it costs the US 2 vaccines to create a TV, and it costs Korea only half a vaccine to make a TV. So therefore, Korea has the comparative advantage in creating TVs. All right, if we wanted to do that without doing all of this math, okay, so for those of us who are a little more math oriented, we could write it like this. We could say, for the US, 6V equals 1. 6V equals 3 TV. And for Korea, 1V equals 2 TV. And then we would just solve. So if we wanted to compare vaccines, we would solve for V, whereas you would divide this by 6 and you would divide this by 6. So you would get 1 vaccine were equal to half a TV. And 1 vaccine here would equal 2 TVs here. So the US would have comparative advantage in vaccines. Or you could solve for TVs. If you were comparing TVs, you would have 1 TV equals half, and 1 TV equals half. I'm struggling. 1 TV equals 2 vaccines for the US, and 1 TV equals half a vaccine for Korea. So you would solve for, so that would be 1 TV is equal to 2 vaccines. And here you would say 1 TV is equal to half of a vaccine. And so you would solve that way so that you could tell the difference. Okay, that is a lot right there. What you're going to have some questions about that. So what I would probably do is I'm going to give you a problem that I want for you to work out before we discuss this together, and then we'll kind of move forward from here for me to show you the next steps. So I always like to do something that looks a little like this. I always joke that Mr. Rogers and I could both teach economics and math. So we're gonna say Merritt Fields and Billy Rogers, and that the subjects that we could teach would be, sorry, I'm right where you can't really see it very well. The subjects that we would teach would be econ and math. All right. And so let's say that I can teach 10 and 12, and Mr. Rogers can teach, we'll make it a little easier. Let's do it that way. All right. So let's make him worse. Let's make him do 4 and 5. I think I like that better. Let me pause while I think about this math. Okay. So what we've got here is me and Mr. Rogers, and we can both teach econ and we can both teach math. Now, this shows that I have an absolute advantage in both econ and math. This does not mean that I am a better econ or math teacher than Mr. Rogers does. It could just mean I have more students in my room. So for instance, Mr. Rogers could have 8 students in his room, and I could have 100 students in my room. Okay, so all this is saying is one of us can teach more students econ and also teach more math, but it doesn't tell us how good we are at it. It just means that I may have more students than he does. Right? So what I want for you to do is I want for you to see if you can figure out which one of us has the comparative advantage in economics and which one of us has the comparative advantage in math. So the way I want for you to do it is I want for you to write it out longhand. So you're going to write out Merritt's opportunity cost for one econ is blank math. Billy's opportunity cost for one econ is blank math. And then you'll flip it. Merritt's opportunity cost for 10 math is blank econ. Billy's opportunity cost for one math is blank econ. And from there, we'll work together to figure out who has the lower opportunity cost in each one. So when we come together, we will be able to see if you are comfortable with knowing how to do this. And then we'll talk about how to graph it and how we should trade in both terms of maybe me and Mr. Rogers, but also in terms of the United States and Korea and what their terms of trade would be and how it's going to look on a graph once they trade and are able to consume more goods and services. Okay, that's it right now for comparative advantage. I will see you soon, and we will work a little bit more on this. You have some practice problems in the Google Classroom if you want to practice more than just one and see how you do, and we'll look at those together and check your progress. Okay. Have a good day.